Hey, Falcons and NFL fans. Welcome to another episode of NFL Jocks and Pigskins with Tom Pollen, Chris Smitherman producing behind the scenes. I'm Dave Holcomb. We have another exciting show for you today. We're talking Matt Ryan early on. I think we're going to spend a bulk of the show on him announcing that he's going into the broadcasting booth. And because of the rumors that maybe this is the end of Matt Ryan in the NFL. People have been talking about his Hall of Fame candidacy. So we're going to weigh in on what we think about that. And of course, we're also going to talk about Jim Brown, his life in perspective, and his career, of course. Dying yesterday at the age of 87. A big loss in the NFL. One of the greatest players of all time. I think the greatest, to be honest, player of all time. And I will lay out arguments for why he is the greatest today on today's show.
Yeah, definitely one of the greatest. Of course, my man is Walter Payton, but that's because I grew up
Understandable.
Watched his entire career. But yeah, I mean, you can't deny what Jim Brown accomplished in the NFL during his career, and plenty of accomplishments after his career. So there's a lot to look at, a lot of things that he was involved in, and succeeded in. He was basically a success in his entire life.
Yeah. And anything that he did.
Mm-hmm. So, it was, at the age you kind of expect it, but it's still rough to see. You lose another one of your heroes from the, from growing up and just, I mean, being in Chicago, a lot of the talk was about Jim Brown, his career, especially when Walter Payton was starting to reach the all-time rushing yards record. So, you heard a lot about Jim Brown. And if anybody has a chance, get to YouTube, look him up, look at his running style. I mean, the man was just destructive as a runner. Tough to bring down, made it a point of pride to be tough to bring down. And, defensive backs did not want to be one-on-one with him in the open field. It was not a pretty picture. So just incredible runner.
Yeah, absolutely. Incredible player, incredible person. We'll have more on Jim Brown coming up in a little bit. Today's show brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the app. When you do, use our promo code ASU. That gets you a 100% match on your first deposit up to $100. There's no reason to wait to download the app and get started with our promo code. Don't wait until football season. There's other sports that you can place entries on. Was at the Braves game last night, Tom. Exciting comeback win in the seventh inning. They had the lead, 1-0 for a while, but had to come back late, and they scored a few runs at the end. Exciting game, and would have been even more exciting if I had used Prize Picks ahead of time. So
yeah, there you go. Right. You hit it right there. You want to be on the edge of your seat the entire game, even if it's a blowout. You go to Prize Picks, make some player props. So have some fun.
And again, when you get started, use our promo code ASU.
Yep.
So we're talking Matt Ryan today. He's, as we kind of speculated, I don't know if that was last week or the week before, but we talked about him joining the booth, perhaps. Or, as a studio analyst for CBS. That's what he did during the playoffs and was fairly good at it. He's a popular guy, well-spoken, was a great leader during his career. So kind of an obvious choice to kind of transition into television. And that is what Matt Ryan is going to do. But he didn't shut the door on returning to play if, quote unquote, the stars align. That's basically what Matt Ryan said. All the stars would have to align. I've just learned in the 15 years I've played to not shut any doors. He said that in an interview on Sirius XM NFL radio. So I've speculated since the end of last season that San Francisco could be that spot where the stars align, depending on what happens with their injured quarterbacks. His old offensive coordinator is there, and Kyle Shanahan. Yep. But for now, Matt Ryan is joining the television studio.
Yeah, I mean, why not? A lot of former quarterbacks have made the jump to television, and even if you're not the best analyst, commentator, you still make a pretty good living at it if you're a former top quarterback. So
Yeah.
and he's fairly well spoken, but I challenge Ryan the same as I would challenge Tom Brady. Is does he have something to say? Let's see what he has to say. Is he going to be too protective of players to really be bring any kind of criticism that he feels? What kind of insight is he going to give us to the game? And it's going to be interesting to see what he brings to the booth. Can he bring to the booth what he brought to the field as a quarterback? So I think there's no reason why he can't succeed. This is a great move for him. It's a natural move for him. So we'll see how well he does.
He's going to be. Have they said if he's going to be in the booth for games, or is it studio work? I did not see what.
I don't think it's been defined yet.
It hasn't been finalized.
Yeah, I don't think it's been finalized yet. They just talked about him, being CBS hiring him as an analyst. So I don't know if that's going to be in studio or if he's going to go broadcast games. He just had a kid. So, how much is he going to want to go out there and broadcast and be in a booth every weekend? So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out.
Got a couple comments coming in already. Todd saying, good Saturday, guys. Bottom line, Matt is a very nice man, but if Indy had done their homework or watched any cam on game from the last 5 years with the Falcons, his skills diminished every year.
I can't argue that, but I would say that the talent around him diminished every year too. It became very difficult for Matt Ryan to do his job when you don't have it's hard to make bad receivers look good. And to me, my philosophy has always been the quarterback makes the receiver. But, still as a receiver, you got to have some talent too. And it's been rough. I mean, Julio Jones was going downhill every year the last 5 years. And, his Super Bowl receivers kind of went away one after another. And it's rough to make a living as a quarterback that way, especially when your offensive line is also deteriorating.
And you have to remember,
Ryan's not a rusher. I mean, he's not a scrambler.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to remember the offensive line issues. I mean, the line has been fixed now, but last time Ryan played, that line was really struggling. Really one of the worst in the league. And then that's where he landed with another team that was kind of shocking, but the Colts had one of the worst lines in football last year as well. And that, to Todd's point, I think that the Colts way overestimated their own offensive line, not necessarily Matt Ryan's skills, but the Colts failed to recognize that their offensive line peaked in like 2020. Yes. And it had already started to decline maybe in the second half of 2020 and definitely in 2021, just a little, not a lot, but a little. Just enough where maybe you have second thoughts to add a statue like Matt Ryan back there under a line that wasn't going to be one of the best in the league. And then it just absolutely tanked last season, especially when you go into the year with a journeyman at left tackle. I mean, the unit is only as good as your weakest link, and their left tackle, Matt Pryor, going into the season, I don't think he even started left tackle in college. So, I mean, that was a problem right away that the Colts did not recognize as one.
Yeah. And left tackle is not the place where you want to have the weakest link of your offensive line. So, if you want to have a guard that maybe is the weakest link, you can get past that. You can't, right. You're not going to be able to make up for a left tackle that can't do the job.
Yeah.
So, and that's the thing. And remember that the Colts were down to like one really quality starting wide receiver that year too. It doesn't give you a lot of options even when you do have time to throw. So I think Ryan still has skills. I don't think they're nowhere near what he used to be, but he still has skills. He could still be a backup. But yeah, you're right. Indy overvalued what they thought their offensive line was, and Ryan jumped from the frying pan to the fire as far as being rushed and being hit in the backfield.
Todd brings up another question, and he's asking me about him going to the 49ers. Did you see his last game? I'm just asking. I think he's being sarcastic. Yes, I did see that last game. The last game being the biggest blown lead in NFL history against the Vikings. I wouldn't blame that game on Matt Ryan. I'm not saying Matt Ryan didn't contribute. Everybody contributes when you blow a 30-point lead.
Yes.
But you had a coach that had coached 5 games, not only in his NFL career, but in his college. Like he had 5 games experience in the NFL or college as any kind of coach, and he's running the show. That was a big problem in that game, and the lack of them wanting. He made Jeff Saturday made every wrong decision of whether to go for it, whether not to go for it in that game that contributed to that blowing that lead. And of course the defense, giving up 39 points in the second half was just atrocious, absolutely atrocious.
It's almost impossible to do.
Yeah. And I was just going to bring up this point that Montero did. Ryan's replacements got killed too last year. Ryan was 4-7-1, not a good record as a starter with the Colts last year. When the Colts started any other quarterback, they were 0-5. And they had 5 non-losses last year. The Colts had, and all 5 of them, Matt Ryan had a fourth quarter comeback. All 5 of them, you could argue, were because Matt Ryan. So without Matt Ryan, we're talking about the Colts. Maybe the Colts would have preferred this. They would have been picking first in the draft.
It would have been picking first, yeah.
It would have been the worst team in the league without Matt Ryan. So
right.
Did he elevate them to being a good team? No, he did not. He's not in his prime anymore to be able to do that. But he did elevate them. He did we saw what they were without him, and they were a lot worse.
Oh, yeah. It was terrible. And it's just a bad organization right now. You've got another owner who decides that he wants to be part of the player, player development team, player acquisition team, wants to step right in there with Chris Ballard to make personnel decisions. It's not a good mix. Yeah. And with Jim Irsay in there. So, and you saw that last year. You're going to be seeing that going forward. Anytime an owner gets involved with team operations, it's not a good mix, i.e. Dallas Cowboys. So,
yeah. And the Colts, I think you're right. Jim Irsay has been meddling the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Really, maybe since the Carson Wentz thing happened, where they had such a bad end of the season with Wentz in 2021, and Jim Irsay has stepped in and canned Wentz, and he was the one that hired Jeff Saturday before even firing Frank Reich, and that just I think it's a bit of a mess there. I think he was a big reason why they drafted Richardson too, and maybe he's got a lot of skills, but we talked about it a few weeks ago. Richardson is a big risk as well.
Yeah, he's got incredible upside, but if he does not develop and he cannot play the NFL game, which is a lot different than the college game, a lot faster, and you're facing, good defenses every week that can do something against you. It's a rough thing for a quarterback to step into. So we're going to see how well he adjusts from college to pro. Gary's throwing shade at us, Dave.
Yeah, I was going to go to his question about Ryan, but he was asking us if we think Ryan can win 4 more games with a bad team. I guess that's what we're saying. Yeah, perhaps. But it's odd. It's hard to evaluate Matt Ryan's season last year because of his team was so bad. Right. And yes, he was part of why the team was bad. He led the league in turnovers and fumbles before getting benched in October. But he also had 5
getting a head beat in every week. Yeah, you're going to lose the football a couple of times.
Right. Yeah. And again, 5 fourth quarter comebacks, which just seems like a contradiction because they only have 4 wins. How could you have 5 comebacks? but the tie was a comeback as well. Apparently, it goes down as a record.
Yeah.
They were down 17-3 in that game, I think, and they
Yeah.
came back, or maybe it was 20-3, and they scored 17 points in the fourth quarter, something like that. And that was a game they should have won. The Rodrigo Blankenship missed 2 field goals in the late in the fourth quarter and overtime, and one of them was under 40 yards, if I remember correctly. So that was week 1, and we just kind of knew from there it was going to be a rough year for the Colts.
Yeah.
But again, 5 fourth quarter comebacks, 4 game-winning drives, and that was their 4 wins. So a lot of good and a lot of bad with Matt Ryan last year, and I think you could see him on that was Gary's question. Is it possible that he starts the season in the booth and then goes to a playoff team at the end of the season? Yeah, I think that's definitely
very possible.
Very possible.
Yeah. Why not? And I think the Colts still own his rights, though. So that gets to be a little difficult. Matt Ryan has not retired. And one of the reasons why Matt Ryan has not retired is because the Colts still owe him a lot of money.
Yeah.
And if he retires, that money is gone. And the Colts can probably go after him for part of the signing bonus too. So that's the thing. Matt Ryan is not going to retire officially. So he's going to be there for a team if they want to, give up a 6th or 7th round pick and trade for his rights to bring him down to the field. Well, no, he's a free agent, isn't he? No, he's not.
He's a free agent because he got released.
Oh, he got released. Okay, that's right. But the Colts still owe him money.
Right. You're correct that he is not retired, and part of, I think, maybe the main reason, I don't know. I mean, I think Matt Ryan does want to play. I believe, Ryan, that he is still contemplating coming back and playing one more year. But even if he didn't want to play, there's no reason for him to retire because of what you're talking about. Because the Colts still owe him money for the 2023 season. They signed him to a 2-year contract after they traded for him last year, and that money, he wouldn't be paid that if he retired. So,
and see, he becomes a bargain for another team if they want to bring him in as a as a late season acquisition, as a late season, for a late season playoff push. He's a bargain because you don't have to. The Colts are still paying a majority of that salary for 2023.
Todd we've been unable to convince Todd. He's saying that Matt can't make the throws anymore. And look, all I'll say, Todd, is I agree to the point where I'm not calling for a team to sign Matt Ryan right now and make him their starter. Like, I don't think Tampa Bay should say, okay, we're going to bring Matt Ryan in. I guess we did talk about this a few weeks ago, but I don't think it's like realistic to say Matt Ryan should go to Tampa Bay and he's the clear-cut starter. He's clearly better than Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask. I don't necessarily believe that right now. But I'm talking about an emergency where we're in November and the Dallas Cowboys are 8-1 and Dak Prescott gets hurt. And maybe Cooper Rush gets hurt. And we can say that's highly unlikely to happen. Well, it happened last year with the 49ers.
We've seen it all. We've seen it all the time.
Yeah.
Team charging towards the playoffs, and all of a sudden our quarterback situation gets muddled because you got injuries, and you're trying to find somebody who can at least get you to the finish line. And maybe that's what Matt Ryan is. He's a guy who can get you to the finish line. You might not win because of him, but he's going to give you enough veteran presence that he's not going to make any big mistakes either. And he's going to get you into those playoffs, and then you can go from there. It's all a matter of making the playoffs. You make the playoffs, it's as long as you got a chance, as long as you're in the mix, as long you're in the tournament, you got a chance. So, get me there, and then we'll go from there. I think Matt Ryan can push the team over the finish line.
I don't want to say that if Ryan had played for the 49ers in that championship game, San Francisco wins. I think that's way too big of a stretch. But
that's a stretch.
If you're the 49ers, would you rather have Matt Ryan than Josh Johnson playing the second half of that game?
Yes. Oh, God, yes.
So that's what we're talking about, Todd, that if a team just gets decimated with quarterback injuries, and it still might take Matt Ryan swallowing his pride and coming back as a backup, because Brock Purdy was playing really well, and Brock Purdy could could very well, was playing well enough to lead them to the championship game. But if you're backup to Purdy, or you're backup to, if you're the Cowboys, if you're backup to Cooper Rush, if Prescott is out, is some guy off the street, wouldn't you rather have that guy off the street be Matt Ryan than than Jim Johnson or whoever? Josh Johnson?
Josh
Don't
Johnson.
even remember his name.
Well, right.
I
Exactly.
think the answer is yes.
Of course you would. Yeah, I mean, and the 49ers lucked into Brock Purdy last year. And they really, for Mr. Irrelevant to come on and lead your team to the playoffs, that took some doing. But yeah, once he was injured, that was it for the 49ers.
And I think that kind of situation is best for Ryan because they were winning. Purdy was playing very well, but Purdy was playing very well within the system that Shanahan was running, and there's so many weapons there, and they have great offensive line and a fantastic defense. If Ryan could land in a situation like that and be Peyton Manning 2015,
yeah,
I think it's possible that he plays and could still have some success.
Yeah, you remember Peyton Manning had nothing left that Super Bowl season for the Broncos. He should have retired actually before that year because he had nothing. And
I agree with you. But I think he wanted to make one last run at the Super Bowl and knew he had a team to do it. And
he had just enough to get them over, get them there. It took the great defense to win the thing. But, again, a veteran presence who doesn't lose you games. So that's a lot of what you're looking for, especially when you're down a couple of quarterbacks. You're down your starter, and you want to be in that situation. Yeah, you need that veteran. You're not going to do it with Jay Johnson or Jim Johnson, Josh Jimson or whatever.
Right. Yeah. Todd wants to ask a question about Ritter, and we'll get to this, and then I want to talk about Matt Ryan's Hall of Fame candidacy. Todd says, this week, Coach in a podcast left open the case that it's an open quarterback competition. What podcast was that, Todd? Can you be a little more specific? I did not see. I think you're talking about Arthur Smith and him being now going back on his comments, because early in the offseason, I think the organization made it pretty clear that it's Ritter who's the starting quarterback, and I think it should be.
It has to be.
Yeah, I think if there's any going back on that and opening up quarterback to a competition, that would be a mistake. I think Ritter should be the guy, even if he maybe loses some games early in the season. I think he should remain the guy, because you got to really figure out what you have in Ritter. I know he wasn't a high draft pick. I know he was just a third rounder. But that's a high enough pick to me that you don't want to waste that pick and just assume after a handful of games this season and 4 games last year that he's not the answer. I think you really need a whole season to evaluate what you have in Ritter and really see what the progression is like. Does he continue to get better in November and December? Part of why I'm excited about Kenny Pickett is he got better in November and December. Did he put up great stats? Did he look like, even Brock Purdy at the end of last season? Not necessarily, but I think he really did improve each game. And you can't see that improvement if you're going to bench Ritter after 3 weeks. You have to live and die with this kid this year.
Exactly. Because you have to know going forward. And Taylor Heineke is not going to be the guy, is not the future of this franchise. He's here to be there in case Ritter goes down, but he's not the future of the franchise. He's here to kind of mentor Ritter and be the guy to kind of take Ritter aside on the sidelines and say, okay, kid, this is what you need to be looking for in these, on that last series. That's kind of why you have him. He's not going to be your starter. You already know what he can bring to a team. Solid quarterback play, but nothing that's going to get you, forward to the playoffs. You got to see if Ritter can do that kind of thing. And yeah, you're right. I mean, sometimes stats don't tell the whole story. You're talking about Kenny Pickett. Yeah, not great stats, but he had that team winning at the end. So you want to see what Ritter can do, how the guys in the huddle react around him. Even if he has some rough times, do they still look like they believe in him, look like he can do something? Are they encouraging him? And that's a lot of what you want to see. You have to know now, because you got to know what you need to do next season, next off season, if you need to bring in a quarterback or not for serious quarterback competition.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would think that Smith was very stubborn in keeping Mariota the starter last year. He should, if the media called, I agree, but he should have the same stubbornness with Ritter this season.
Yes. Yeah.
And even more so. I think he should be more stubborn, because this is a guy that has been brought in to perhaps be the answer quarterback. You need to give him time to enough of a big enough sample to really know what you have in him. So,
well, the Falcons like to think that they stole a quarterback in the third round. Yeah. Well, now you got to find out if you did or not.
Yeah, and Tony summarizes what we're saying real nice. Desmond Ritter is a starting quarterback, case closed. So yeah,
he kind of says in one sentence what we just took the last 5 minutes to say.
Right. Yes. But let's touch upon Matt Ryan's Hall of Fame candidacy. I think this is a topic that we're going to get into if our show lasts several more years. It's going to be a topic that comes back up over and over again as Matt Ryan finally enters retirement, and not officially retired yet, but because he's going into the booth or into the studio, people have kind of begun discussing whether or not Matt Ryan is a Hall of Fame quarterback. I think I know where you're going to fall on this debate, Tom, because I think I've heard this argument from you, but I want to hear it again. And before we get to that, though, Bleacher Report, Gridiron's Twitter account, asked the question flat out, is Matt Ryan a Hall of Famer? And you can vote on the Bleacher Report app. More than 15,000 votes were cast, and 54.7% said no, with 45.3% saying yes. But that's pretty split, where you have, I think you're going to find this with discussing Matt Ryan's Hall of Fame candidacy over the next several years, that people are very split on whether or not he should go in the Hall of Fame. Kind of like, we and Todd were split on evaluating his season last year. So what's your reaction to a small majority, but a majority saying he's not a Hall of Famer, Tom?
Well, I think that majority is looking at the entirety of his career in playoff competition, and everybody's going to look at that Super Bowl. It's just, he's not going to be able to escape from it, even though I still contend that Super Bowl was not his fault. Terrible coaching and terrible decision-making by the coaches. Not his fault. But he's going to have to live with that his entire life. He's going to have that in his background his entire life. And I give the man credit. He's never run from it. But statistically, if you look at his career, if you look what he's accomplished as a quarterback, yes, he's a Hall of Famer. He's in the top 5, top 10 at least, and top 5 in many categories, ahead of so many Hall of Famers, that you have to look at Ryan. He's definitely a Hall of Fame quarterback. You look at fourth quarter comebacks and game-winning drives, and he's in the top 5 in both categories, in both of those categories. The guy was just an incredible pressure quarterback. And I maintain if they had actually saved another timeout for Ryan in that Super Bowl, that he might have brought that team back down the field for a field goal, for a game-winning field goal. But they wasted that timeout when Dan Quinn made the stupid challenge to the Edelman catch. And I'd say if Ryan still had that timeout in his pocket, there's no reason why I didn't think Ryan couldn't get that team downfield again. But because he was hitting on long day. But all in all, you got to look at what the guy accomplished his entire career, and he outpaces a lot of Hall of Fame quarterbacks in just about any statistic you want to bring up. You name it. I got the stats right here. I'll bring it up for you where he finished in top 10, where he finished for his career. And he's just an outstanding quarterback. He had an outstanding career. And I don't think you can deny him the Hall of Fame. What's going to hurt him is that Super Bowl.
Yeah.
But overall, I don't think you can deny him a Hall of Fame entry. I think he will go in.
I think he will too. I think you are correct. I agree with you that based on who has gone in or based on who we're projecting to go in, he is in that same group of quarterbacks, elite quarterbacks. But I guess the point I would make today, or maybe the question I want to propose, is have we lowered the standard of what Hall of Fame is at quarterback? And we have so many, like there's so many passing yards now, and it's such a quarterback driven league. They're the clear cut faces of the franchises, and they're the stars, and there's other stars at other positions. I get it, but this quarterback is particularly like a specialized position, and I just wonder, like, is it going to get to the point where if you were a starter for one team for like a decade, that's going to make you Hall of Fame? Because of course you're going to pile up a lot of stats and touchdown passes, and like if Matt Ryan goes in, like is Eli Manning going to be in? Does Matthew Stafford have a case then? And I don't think those guys are Hall of Fame quarterbacks. So I think Matt Ryan probably is, but I wonder if it's a slippery slope if we let him in. And I don't even have the answer. If maybe clearly it's not, and clearly his numbers justify that he's in. And if he had won that Super Bowl, it probably is a different discussion. A clear-cut Hall of Famer. Yeah. And it's kind of a shame. We can have – that could be a debate that we have. Like, should that even weigh on our decision? Because I'm looking at Pro Football Reference here, and they have this number that's called Hall of Fame metric. Admittedly, I don't know how they measure that. But they have a group of quarterbacks that are clear-cut, like greatest of all time. Then they have a group of quarterbacks that they're calling average Hall of Fame quarterbacks, which is an interesting title because you're still in the Hall of Fame, but you're average based on the greatest of all time, I guess. And Matt Ryan is number one in that group. And number two is Ben Roethlisberger. And I look at Ben Roethlisberger and I say, I think he's a clear-cut Hall of Famer. But you've got the 2 Super Bowl wins. You've got those championships, the big ones in the playoffs. You have the game-winning drive in the Super Bowl against the Cardinals. If had Matt Ryan gotten that, he's a clear-cut Hall of Famer like Ben Roethlisberger. So, and you know what? Based on the rules, when Matt Ryan played, he didn't even get a chance to have that moment, that game-winning drive in the Super Bowl, because he didn't get the ball in overtime.
Right?
Like, should that impact our decision because if he gets a chance with the ball there, as quarterbacks do now going in the Super Bowl, it might have been back and forth, Brady and Ryan scoring touchdowns for all eternity, all night. So
you never know, right?
Yeah. But I do wonder if, like, and I'm concerned that we're watering down the Hall of Fame, not necessarily. And I hate to say it's Matt Ryan that's causing the watering down, but I just think I wonder if other if Matt Ryan gets in, that opens the door for other quarterbacks that aren't deserving, like Matthew Stafford. I would say I don't think Matthew Stafford's a Hall of Fame quarterback. But he's got a lot of things, and he's got a Super Bowl win.
Yes, he does. That's a good argument, Dave. That's a good way of looking at it. I look at Pro Football Reference, and they give you player comps, similar players, players whose career wins are of a similar quality and shape, and he's among Hall of Fame quarterbacks and player comps too, according to Pro Football Reference.
So who do they compare him
to? Peyton Manning, Brett Favre, Drew Brees, Jim Kelly, Fran Tarkenton. Now Phillip Rivers is on there, but he's not Phillip Rivers, But career Joe Montana, again Fran Tarkenton, John Elway, they got his player comps among some pretty high ranking quarterbacks.
Yeah,
and you have to look at that, and it's an incredible run, and I say his career still takes the shape of, being a Hall of Fame quarterback. You look at some guys who never won the Super Bowl, and still, I mean, Dan Marino never won a Super Bowl.
that's true.
Dan Fouts never went to a Super Bowl.
That's true. Yeah.
Jim Kelly never won. He went 4 times though, but
Yeah.
I mean, that's another story. But you look at some guys who never achieved what Ryan achieved in the game and are still in the Hall of Fame. So you have to look at it and say, overall career, I think you have to judge him as a Hall of Famer based on his accomplishments, based on his final list of accomplishments and statistics. So, that's about all I can say. Is I can sit here and make an argument for him all day, and I think people will make the argument against him, but I think based on what he did across the course of his career, yeah, he has to be. You can't deny him, and I don't think he's going to be denied.
Tony says Matt Ryan is absolutely a Hall of Fame quarterback. Gary agrees. He says if Joe Namath is in the Hall of Fame, he loves Joe Namath. How can you not put in Matt Ryan? That's kind of the point I'm trying to make, Gary, that there are already quarterbacks in the Hall of Fame that I don't think deserve to be in. Joe Namath being one of them, although I don't think we should compare Matt Ryan to Joe Namath.
I will argue that with you all day, Dave.
That Joe Namath should be in the Hall of Fame?
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
How about Kurt Warner? You think Kurt Warner should be in the Hall of Fame?
No, but I have a particular case for Joe Namath if you want to take a couple of seconds to hear it.
All right, sure.
After the merger was announced in 1966 between the AFL and NFL,
yeah,
and they played the first 2 Super Bowls, and the AFC got blown out. Kansas City and Oakland got blown out in those first 2 Super Bowls by the Packers. There were a lot of questions among NFL owners about whether they wanted to merge with this league after all, whether they wanted to get together with the AFL. A lot of doubts. And going into that 3rd Super Bowl, the Jets were 26-point underdogs, up against one of a great, Baltimore Colts team.
Yeah.
Yeah. Solid on offense and defense. Quarterback Johnny Unitas and Earl Morrall as quarterbacks. And you go back to it, and Namath basically and famously guaranteed victory. He said, we're going to win. The fact is the Jets did win. And no, Joe Namath did not have a spectacular game, but not making any mistakes and keeping the Jets team within itself actually had a lot to do with winning that game. He saved the AFL-NFL merger. Okay? Because until that time, if the Colts had blown out the Jets, the NFL picture, we might be seeing a completely different NFL picture than what we're seeing now. So he makes the Hall of Fame because he saved the merger.
It's historical significance why Namath is in the Hall of Fame, is what you're saying.
And when he came into the league, he was an incredible passer. I mean, he was one of the greatest passers you'd ever want to see until he hurt his knee. And that knee injury, they just never... these days, that knee injury probably recovers from no problem. Those years, they didn't know how to treat knee injuries. So that's just the way it goes. Yeah, historically, Joe Namath saved the NFL merger and definitely belongs in the Hall of Fame.
I mean, I would not argue that. I would not argue that he saved football the way it is today. But I guess you're making my argument partially of why Namath would be in it, why Namath is in. I think him being in New York was a big reason too. And
yeah.
if Matt Ryan had played in New York, clear cut Hall of Famer.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt.
But he played in Atlanta, and unfortunately, this is probably not going to be popular among our Atlanta listener base. But it's just not not a place that gets a lot of attention across the NFL in football. So it's more of a college area. In professional sports, probably the Braves are more popular. So it's just not a diehard NFL place. And they don't get we see that in the schedule this year. No primetime games for the Atlanta Falcons.
Right. So, exactly.
It's harder for players from the Falcons to get the same national clout as somebody that plays in a place like New York. And I think the fact that Namath made that guarantee and won a championship for a New York team is a big reason why he got voted in the Hall of Fame.
Yes, of course it is. That has a lot to do with it too. You're right. If Matt Ryan played in New York or with the Patriots or another nationally recognized team, yeah, he's in easily. Nobody's arguing it. By the way, Tony, Dan Fouts is in the Hall of Fame. That was part of my point. Never a Super Bowl, but is in the Hall of Fame anyway because he was an incredible passer.
Yeah. I think Tony is saying that. And Larry Orange brings up another guy that never won the Super Bowl, Fran Tarkenton. And he's in the Hall of Fame.
Yes. So I think you look at the totality of his career. Yeah, he's a Hall of Famer. I have no doubt about that. I think he will go in. So I have no doubts about that either. So we're going to have, other than one season, lifetime Atlanta Falcons player who is going into the Hall of Fame. Would be nice if Mike Ken would join him in there and maybe a couple other guys that were lifetime Falcons and have them inducted into the Hall of Fame. But, finally going to have a Falcons guy who spent his career with the Falcons, except for, again, one season. But, right. I mean, how many people mentioned that Joe Montana was a Kansas City Chiefs quarterback? For crying. He's a 49er. So, that's the thing. He identifies with Atlanta, and he's going to be in the Hall of Fame. So,
well, I think that's another interesting question. Maybe kind of already answered it, though. There are people on Twitter I saw respond to the poll that argued that Ryan is going to get hurt in the voters' mind because the last thing they remember of him is that awful season in the Colts uniform. Do you think that's basically, you just said no, that's not going to play a role because you don't remember Joe Montana with the Chiefs or Namath with the Rams, other quarterbacks like that in other places. Right. But I mean, that's another interesting factor as well. Matt Ryan did not have the end of his career like Tom Brady or Peyton Manning with the Super Bowl win. Even though he wasn't playing well, he still won the Super Bowl and left that was the last impression we have of Peyton Manning. The last impression we have of Matt Ryan was not very good.
Yeah, exactly. And that's going to be a problem. I might keep him from being a first ballot Hall of Famer. I'm not saying that Ryan's going to get in on first ballot. I think he should. But that's going to be a problem for him, is that those last couple of impressions that we have nationally of Matt Ryan. So it's going to be an issue. But overall, I have no doubt that he gets in the Hall of Fame. He's definitely a Hall of Fame quarterback.
Tony throws at a couple other players from the Falcons that should be in the Hall of Fame. We agree with you, Tony, that they should be.
I'm not going to argue that, Tony. I'm with you. Tommy Nobis should have been in the Hall of Fame a long time ago. And I don't get it. Jesse Tuggle, you can make a case for a couple of guys who played their, most of their career, if not the entirety of their career with the Falcons and deserve Hall of Fame recognition. The fact that they played in Atlanta is not nationally recognized as, they don't have that national following like some of these other teams do. And that national following does pull players sometimes into the Hall of Fame. Borderline players can get pushed into the Hall of Fame if they played for the right team. So, that can happen. And that's something that, again, Mike Ken, Tommy Nobis, Jesse Tuggle, all these guys are fighting against, is that the national reputation isn't there. And I wish it was. And that's something that can only be built over time. Let's hope that more respect comes nationally for the Atlanta Falcons. It's going to be rough this year. No primetime games unless they get flexed into one.
Right.
So,
yeah. And I think that's something that has been on the mind of Arthur Blank for a while, and partially why perhaps they're drafting the way they are. They're trying to get big, flashy players in there and get noticed around the country. But that's a discussion that we've already had, and maybe a discussion we can have another day. We want to talk about a guy that definitely made the Hall of Fame, class of 1971, Jim Brown, running back for the Cleveland Browns and from Syracuse University. Unfortunately, passed away yesterday at the age of 87. And we want to spend the last 10 minutes or so of our show talking about Jim Brown's accomplishments in the NFL and as a person, as an American, really important figure in the second half of the 20th century, Tom.
Yes. Yeah. Big player in the civil rights movement. And he had no problems lending his reputation and his name and putting himself out there with his opinions on the civil rights movement, which you don't normally, a lot of guys can be reluctant to put their name out there if they're a nationally recognized athlete. So he had a lot of courage to step up the way he did and made an impact that way. So, yeah, did a lot of things in his life, not necessarily all football related.
But on the football field, he was clearly the best player of his era. 8-time All-Pro, Tom. He played 9 seasons in the league, and he was named the best player at his position 8 times. That's first team All-Pro 8 times. Led the league in rushing 8 times. Twice he averaged more than 125 yards per game, rushing yards per game. And that was in a 12, 14 game season sometimes.
Yeah.
If you're talking about him rushing in a 17 game season now, I mean, even in a 16 game season with those averages, assuming he would have been able to maintain those averages, he would have rushed for 2,000 yards. 17 game season, clearly over 2,000 yards. He would have gotten to that milestone, which has only been reached 7 times in NFL history. Or maybe it's 8 times now, something around there, under 10 times. He would have reached it twice in his career. Over 1,500 yards 3 times. One of the times was in a 12-game season. 1,800 rushing yards in 1963. They were playing 14 seasons by then. And I think the best description that I've heard of Brown was that he was the fastest and biggest and strongest player on the field of any player on any team.
Yeah.
And if you want to talk about greatest of all time, I can end the argument right there, because there's no player in any other era that can say they were the biggest, strongest, and fastest player on the field at all times, like Jim Brown said. And you can argue, well, if Jim Brown played today, maybe he wouldn't be the biggest or he wouldn't be the fastest. I mean, that's true, but we can only really see or argue what he played against. And for his era, nobody dominated their era like Jim Brown did.
No, absolutely. It's amazing what he accomplished above and beyond what anybody had ever accomplished on a football field. With me, as far as greatest athletes to ever play sports in America, he and Jim Thorpe are here, and then you got to kind of go down there for your second, for your third choice. But just incredible athlete, a member of the Lacrosse Hall of Fame.
Yeah,
played. His college coach said he was one of the best lacrosse players he had ever seen.
He also ran track.
Lacrosse player he had ever seen.
He ran track, lettered in track, and track at Syracuse as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, just an incredible athlete. And as I said at the opening of the show, a guy that nobody wanted to try and take on one-on-one, because Brown believed in punishing tacklers, in making you regret that you took him on one-on-one, or took him on 2-on-1. He wanted to make defensive players hurt when they try and tackle. That was one of his goals. Make them, punish them for tackling you. And he was one of the best at it. As I said, go to YouTube, watch this guy run, and tell me he couldn't play in today's NFL. Because he's just one of those guys who he was chiseled. He was a rock.
Yeah.
And if you watch The Dirty Dozen, which is, his first main movie after his playing career, he was chiseled in that movie. It was amazing to see what kind of shape he was in. And unfortunately, the Browns were owned by Art Modell, because that's one of the reasons why Jim Brown retired. Is summer of 1966, they were doing reshoots on the movie, and Brown was going to be a couple weeks late to training camp. And instead of saying, we're fine with that, go ahead, you're in shape, you're one of the, you're the greatest player in the game today, don't worry about it. Modell said, yeah, well, you're going to get fined $1,500 for every day of training camp that you missed. And Brown said, okay, well, then I retire. 66 was going to be the last year on his contract. There were doubts about whether he would play beyond that, but you lost a season of him. You forced his hand. You basically told him, it's either this or nothing. And Brown was going to act no matter what, especially after The Dirty Dozen. That was a good movie. He had a good performance in it.
I was going to be one of my last points about Brown, maybe the best performance of any athlete in a movie ever. I mean, he is terrific in Dirty Dozen.
Yes.
And Dirty Dozen is a fantastic movie that whoever has not seen it should watch it.
See it.
Go watch it. And next weekend will be a great time for Memorial Day. It's in my rotation of war movies that I always like to watch. Yes. And Jim Brown is fantastic in it.
Yeah. Great performances by a lot of actors in there. And Jim Brown does not have to apologize his performance up against any of those other actors in the movie. And as I say, you got a lot of, that was a fairly high ticket movie as far as its star power. So, and he held his own, but it's a great movie. And again, Art Modell forced his hand. That was incredibly stupid for Art Modell to do. One of the first years I was writing for Football Nation, one of my first Hall of Fame prediction articles, Art Modell was up for induction into the Hall of Fame. I read that story about him threatening to fine Brown because he was going to be 2 weeks late to training camp. And I was like, Art Modell, no, he's not fit to polish the bus in the Hall of Fame, much less be one.
Yeah.
Yeah. It just, no way ever. So you forced the greatest the greatest runner in history of the NFL to retire. You pushed him into retirement. You had no business being in the Hall of Fame. So,
and Brown led. He finished with 12,312 rushing yards. Remained the rushing leader until Walter Payton. Right? Is that correct?
Walter
Payton broke his record. Brown, remained in the top 10 for rushing until I think just a few years ago. He's still very high on the list with those 12,000 yards, and probably will remain so with the way the game is kind of going towards utilizing two running backs in backfields, and running backs having short careers even when they are bell cow backs. So, his statistics, although maybe not the very top like they were in the late 60s, still fantastic numbers even among contemporary players. Tony, you bring up something I wanted to mention as well. 3 MVP awards, and he won an MVP in his first season and then in his last season. So again, it just speaks to the dominance that he had. Maybe he didn't play for a super long time, although 9 years now in the league for a running back's pretty long time.
Good, yeah.
And he never missed any time either. Tony bringing up another great point. He missed one half of a game because he broke his hand. and he played in every single other game, or he played in every single game in the regular season of his.
Never missed a game in his career.
Yeah, never missed a game.
And is the only back in NFL history, and probably will be the only back in NFL history, to average more than 100 yards per game. 104.3 yards per game was his average every time he finished a game. It's just incredible that anybody could do that. I mean, I thought it was incredible when Walter Payton was like at 86 point something yards per game. And seeing Jim Brown at 104.3 yards per game, it's just, it's one of those things you're never going to see again.
When Le'Veon Bell was in his prime, he would get compared not rushing yards per game, but scrimmage yards per game. He'd get compared to Jim Brown. And I don't think they have that on Pro Football Reference. I'd have to do some math to figure out how many yards from scrimmage he averaged per game. But I mean, I think it was more than 120 yards from scrimmage per game. And Bell was doing that through like 3 or 4 or 5 years at the beginning of his career. And then, of course, Le'Veon Bell missed a season and he joined the Jets and Chiefs and went downhill from there. But imagine like Le'Veon Bell's first 5 years and extrapolate that over a whole decade. And like that was Jim Brown. That was what he accomplished in his career. So just
right.
An unbelievable player, really unbelievable. And I'm glad you brought up his other athletic accomplishments. As a sophomore at Syracuse, he was the second leading scorer on the basketball team. He played basketball as well. I mentioned he lettered in track and lacrosse. He's in the Collegiate Hall of Fame for lacrosse. So just a fantastic athlete and great actor. Dirty Dozen, I think, was his peak of his acting career. And then you mentioned his civil rights work as well.
Yeah. Right now he's 11th on the all-time rushing list.
11th. Okay.
Yeah. So, but still, I would say the only guy I would compare to Jim Brown as far as running style would be, and running endurance would be, Barry Sanders. Sanders was the same kind of runner. He was hard to actually get a beat on when you were going to tackle him, because he'd spin and he'd be gone. You'd end up with an armful of empty air, or he could run over you. Barry Sanders was that kind of back. And I would say Barry Sanders comes the closest in rushing style to Jim Brown.
Another guy that retired early, and you could argue should have kept playing. I think he only played 9 years like Jim Brown did.
I was ready for Barry Sanders to break Peyton's rushing record.
Yeah.
And I was not going to begrudge him that, because Sanders earned it. And the year that he was going to do it, he retired. Shocked the hell out of me.
Yeah. I think he shocked everybody.
Yes, he did. So, but yeah, probably the closest I've ever seen come to Jim Brown's rushing style is Barry Sanders.
Tony throws out a couple other names. He would compare Jim Brown to Eric Dickerson, a guy that did rush for 2,000 yards in the 80s in one season. And Edgerrin James is another Hall of Fame running back that did a lot in the passing game with the Colts and had over 10,000 rushing yards. So, yeah, those are some interesting comparisons, Tony. One other stat I wanted to mention with Jim Brown, you brought up his rushing yards per game. I think his rushing yards per carry is what sticks out to me. 5.2 for a whole career. And like if guys average 5.2 in a season, that's amazing. For a season. For a season, we'll get a handful of guys that have 200 carries. They actually are like used a lot in the running game like Jim Brown was, and average more than 5 yards per carry. And Brown did it for a decade of averaging more than 5 yards per carry.
Exactly. It's just incredible. His accomplishments are incredible. As I said, one of the greatest athletes to ever play the sport. Again, put him up there with Jim Thorpe. And then you could start going down from there as far as athletes to ever play in, U.S. sports. But just incredible what he was able to accomplish. And, but did a lot of things in a lot of aspects of his life. Again, just did not retire from football and sit on those accomplishments. Kept going on from there.
This comment came in almost an hour ago from Gary, and we fortunately, you did speak to Jim Brown stepping away from the game, and Gary agrees with you that it was too early and not positive reflection of the Cleveland Browns and their.
Well, that's why there was a split between him and the Cleveland Browns for a long time. A couple of decades, they kind of kept their difference. Brown did not want to be associated with the Cleveland Browns, unfortunately. And that changed later on in his life. But for a long time, he really did not emphasize, being part of the Cleveland Browns. So it was rough. That was a rough split.
Today's show was brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the app, use our promo code ASU to get started. That gets you a 100% match on your first deposit. No reason to wait until football season. You can get started today with baseball. Baseball entries in there. I know Tom always floats out cricket and some other sports that you can get started with. So check out Prize Picks. And when you do, use our promo code ASU. That supports the show, and it gets you some free money to get started in the app.
You can be the champion of cricket prop bets if you go to Prize Picks. And if you want to be an all-time great in something, study up on cricket and start hitting the prop bets in cricket. And I'm sure, you'll be recognized as one of the great cricket. What do I want? What's the word I want?
Cricket prognosticators.
Prognosticators, yes. That's the one.
Yeah.
You got it.
A couple other house cleaning things. We're not going to have a show next week. It's Memorial Day weekend. We're going to.
What else do you have to say about next week, Dave?
Well, yeah, I'm getting to it, Tom. I was just going to say, we're not going to be around next weekend. We hope everyone has a great Memorial Day weekend, enjoying some barbecue, but also taking some time to honor our fallen troops. And even if that means, watching the Dirty Dozen, do something to.
My grandfather, I watched the Battle of the Bulge because that's the battle where my grandfather lost his life. Only grandparent I never got to meet was my grandfather. He died in World War II.
Yes. So take some time to remember those veterans that have died for our freedom next weekend. And I'm actually not going to be on the show for a while going forward. Friday is due date time for our baby. Shannon and I are having our first child. So I will be going on paternity leave from the show. Thank you, Tom. So I
that's
don't.
Sincere, Dave. That's not sarcastic. That's sincere.
I know.
I'm serious. Congratulations to you and Shannon.
Thank you.
It's just wonderful.
Thank you. Oh, we got some comments coming in here. Yeah. Thank you, guys. So I won't be around for, I'm not sure how long, but I will return at some point. Tom will be back the week after Memorial Day weekend, and we'll try and get some guests to pair Tom with while I'm away for a month or so. And I'll be back around, I think, training camp time.
Yep, absolutely. So again, valuable time, spend that time well, and looking forward to hearing about your firstborn. It's going to be outstanding.
He's going to give Millie a run for his money in terms of commenting, behind the scenes, making noise. Millie's been real quiet today. She's been a good audience member today, but she can be loud.
Sozo's been quiet, but she's been all over the place today.
Yeah, I did notice that. I didn't comment on it, but yeah, she's been at a lot of screen time today.
Yes, a lot of screen time.
Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for all the congratulations you're sending in. Tony says they're going to hold down the fort. Yep, Tom will do a great job holding down the fort while I'm gone. So thanks everyone, and Tom will see you in 2 weeks.
Absolutely. Have a great week, everyone.